Good evening. Apparently the microphone is not working. I don't know. Still, can you hear now? It should be at 12 o'clock. Why? Is it 12 o'clock? That's it. That is past 12? Me? Try one more time. Is that better? Can y'all hear now? Can you hear me now? We're in Genesis 18 tonight, and we're about to venture into a very dark period of biblical history. A very unsettled period and brutal and gruesome. Many ways to describe what we're about to encounter here. But as it pertains to Lot, who is described by Peter as a righteous man, we're going to see that the term righteous perhaps is more relative a term than maybe we are willing to give it credit for. How does one define righteous in light of what we're about to read? However, we're not taking issue with what Peter said because Lot was a righteous man. So I'm reading the text from the vantage point of 2 Peter 2, verse 7, where Peter did describe Lot in that way. But let's begin Genesis 18. The Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, bowed himself to the ground, and said, "My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet. Rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant." They said, "Do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" So he said, "Here in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." Let's just stop here for a moment, make a few observations. 3 men appeared to Abraham. We're going to continue reading in a moment, the rest of chapter 18 and chapter 19, and something interesting will be said about one of these men, and that interesting note is he will be described not as the lowercase L, Lord, but as the uppercase L, Lord. We have the Lord in human form visiting Abraham with 2 other heavenly visitors. These would be angels of some order or other. But here's some interesting thoughts that come to my mind as I'm reading this account in Genesis. Because the Lord appeared to Abraham in human form and ate a meal with Abraham. When we read in Genesis chapter 3, where God came down in the cool of the day to walk with Adam and Eve, do you suppose that God came in human form? and that when he came in human form and walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day, that he probably partook of some of the fruit with Adam and Eve and ate with them? Do you suppose that's possible? I do know this, that when Jesus described heaven, he described himself as our servant in heaven, who will serve us. We will sit at his table, and he will provide us a feast, and we will feast with him for eternity. And so I just cannot imagine that, since that seemed to be the driving goal of God, to reconcile himself to mankind on that level, that before sin entered the picture, that God was enjoying that kind of relationship with man. And here, again, the Lord is having a meal with Abraham, but he's in human form. And as I mentioned last week, this example of the Lord appearing in human form is the first, but it's certainly not the last in the Old Testament. He will appear many times. Another thing that strikes me when we read this is how quickly Abraham saw these men and ran to greet them. And he didn't just run to greet them, but he insisted that they come into his tent and that they refresh themselves and that they have a meal with him. You remember what the Hebrew writer said in Hebrews chapter 13. Let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some have unwittingly entertained angels. Now, many times I've brought this passage up, and we've discussed it before, and I don't have any more answers to this text than I did the first time, or the second time, or the 100th time that I brought it up. But I will bring it up just to make this observation. Apparently, there have been individuals who have been entertained at times, who obviously were angels, but the individuals entertaining them were not aware that they were angels. So these angels would have come in human form. And so we see that happening here in Genesis chapter 18. Of course, the Lord was recognized on some level, in some way, by Abraham. He's going to call him in just a few moments the judge of all the earth. So he recognizes that he's speaking to deity in just a moment. But again, I thought that passage in Hebrews tied in nicely with this, because Abraham is here exercising hospitality. He does become aware at some point that this is deity and that these are angelic beings of some kind. But have you ever wondered about this passage and what it means? How someone could possibly entertain an angel and not know it? And that the Hebrew writer is encouraging us to be careful to not neglect to entertain strangers, people you don't know, because you never know who they may be. So it's possible that angels are there. I mean, of course, someone could argue, yeah, that was the first century, and that's when miracles were happening. Okay. All that being said, I'm not sure that that's what the Hebrew writer means here. I'm not sure exactly what he means. It's just fascinating to me. Roger, before you have a heart attack, what's that? Yes?
Have you checked the Hebrew on the My Lord here to see if it's Yahweh?
No, sir, I have not. I have not. I believe it's Jehovah. I believe the American Standard Version. Does anyone have the American Standard Version? Sir?
Jehovah would be the same as
Yes.
Yahweh. The reason I asked is I did a study one time on this. It seemed like to me that's what one of the texts revealed.
Yes.
That the word Yahweh is used.
American Standard says Jehovah.
Jehovah, yes, that's what I thought.
Okay.
So this is Jehovah, indeed. Now here's something that's interesting. And I'm in one of those moods, so I guess it's okay for me to get into a lot of trouble. In 1 Peter chapter 3, and before I just reference it, I'm going to read it. 1 Peter chapter 3. I'm going to read it. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, not Jehovah, but lowercase l, Lord, a term of respect, whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. I don't know what struck me when I read this. Abraham saw these men, he invited them to his house, and the first thing he did was he went to his tent and he said, "Here, woman, prepare a meal for these guests." Now, where's the argument from Sarah? You see, that's what I knew you were thinking that. Now, the Lord just didn't tell us everything. But you just told us something about yourself. But Sarah just did what Abraham told her to do. And she called him Lord. And Peter said, this is how it's supposed to be. I'm not going to say another word. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. I just did. So, all right. Moving on, Sarah laughed. You know, Abraham laughed. And, Jordan was saying last week, reason perhaps the Lord did not rebuke or even respond really to Abraham's laughter was perhaps his laughter was of a different kind, and he was laughing out of joy, just happy, elated that God's telling him you're going to have a son by Sarah. But she laughed, and the reason for her laughter is biological. I'm past the age of childbearing. It's not possible from a purely human point of view. In the book of Galatians, Paul is going to talk at length about the old law and the new law, and he's going to compare and contrast them. And those two laws will be based on Isaac and Ishmael. One was the son of the flesh, and the other was the son of promise. Now, the son of promise would be this son that God is here referencing. And it's the son of promise, not just in the sense that God promised that he would give them the son, but in the sense that it was in some way miraculously brought about. Not a virgin birth, but nevertheless, miraculously, God did intervene, and allow Sarah to become pregnant when she was already past the age of childbearing. So we can understand why she laughed. I mean, she is an old woman. And this just didn't make sense from a purely human standpoint. But God said, why did you laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? There's really a thought for all of us to grasp hold of. Is it possible that we limit God? And I believe we do. Every day we limit God. We just don't see how this is possible, or that's possible, or this will ever get fixed, or that will ever turn around, or this will ever be any better. We just don't see any way out. And really, at the end of the day, what we're saying is, I just don't believe that God can. Or maybe we've prayed about it and we didn't see immediate results, and we just decided God's not interested in that, or God just doesn't want to do that, and we just give up too soon. Abraham's been waiting a while, several years. And God's saying still, even though you've waited, it's going to happen. You're going to have a son. And Sarah is going to be the mother of this son. She denied it because she was afraid. But God said, you did laugh. I heard you. So you're laughing because you have children who argue with you like that, don't you? Admit it, they do. You don't have children argue? All liars shall have their part. Okay, let's go to verse 16. I know your children. The men arose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. This is Jehovah, is it not? In the American Standard Version, Abraham is standing before Jehovah, the latter part of verse 22, okay? And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Who do you think he's considering here? He's thinking about his nephew. Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Do you think Abraham knew who he was talking to? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. Then Abraham answered and said, indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes, have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous, would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there should be 40 found there. And he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. He said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it for the 30 there. And he said, indeed now I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. But once more, suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. I'm guessing that the number 10 would have been Lot, his daughters, and sons-in-law. All of them had they heeded his voice. And the Lord probably knew this before Abraham started bartering with him. And you might look at this exchange as God just granting him the opportunity to, as we sometimes say, Jew him down. By the way, that expression comes from this text. Abraham, of course, was not really a Jew in that sense. We do say in the song at Vacation Bible School, he was the first wandering Jew. Technically, he wasn't a Jew as such, but he was, of course, the father of the Jewish people. But nevertheless, he is certainly bartering with the Lord, and I believe the Lord knew in advance that he was going to be bartering in this fashion, so he showed forbearance. He allowed him to go through this whole exercise because he knew what he really wanted to say. He was just too timid, I think, to come out and say it. What if it's just the family of Lot that you find there? The problem is, Lot couldn't even get his whole family to listen to it. That's the tragedy of this story. But there's also a greater lesson here. God said, I will spare the city for the sake of 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. If I could just find that percentage, how many people lived in Sodom and Gomorrah? I don't know. We wouldn't be able to know that for sure and certain. No one could really guess that. But they were good-sized cities, no doubt. There were a number of people there. So what percentage of that city, I couldn't say. But it does tell us. We do learn here. And this will be repeated many times in biblical history. And in secular history. There comes a point in time when society becomes so corrupt as a whole. I mean, top to bottom, middle, everything in between. It's just so far gone that God says, that's it. There's nothing redeemable, nothing worthy, nothing to spare about these people. And so those people are destroyed, and usually that destruction starts from within. In this case, it came from above in the form of fire and brimstone. But again, there does come that tipping point. And this is the first time we see where God's judgment has come to fruition. You know, Brother Rex Turner used to say, no one knows the day or the hour when the Lord will return. And he would remind us, no one knows the day or the hour. But he would often surmise, and I agreed with his surmising, that perhaps there's going to come a point in human history when all of humanity pretty much abandons God. And there are not enough decent people, redeemable people on planet Earth for God to continue to allow Earth to stand. And it will be at that point that God says, it's over. It's done. In fact, Jesus even seems to allude to that. In Matthew 24, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? May not be anyone here left that truly believes or that truly obeys. Again, when that time will come, only the Lord knows, obviously. But again, the Lord does operate in this way, whether that means that is going to indicate the end of time, and whether we can feel confident knowing that we have a lot of good people still left on planet Earth, so we don't have anything to worry about. It would be foolhardy on our part to draw that conclusion. We don't know that. But we can say, and this was true in Genesis 6 through 9, humanity had reached a point where it was not redeemable. There was Noah and his family, but that was it. That was all. 8 people in the entire planet. So God destroyed the planet. So it may get to the point where there's just a handful of people on planet Earth, and God will say, that's it. There's just not enough. Those few people really can't overcome the odds against them. So, yes, Roger.
During the time of the Old Testament, we find this, like I say many times, but I'm reminded of Jonah and his responsibility to the city of Nineveh.
Yes.
He preached, even though he didn't want them to hear it, and they obeyed. But there was a time later in history when God struck down the city of Nineveh 3
Yes.
times after the great.
Yes.
So we know this to be the case in many, many situations.
Well, this came up earlier. Remember when God was promising Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan? He said it will be 400 years before your descendants inherit that land because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And so God was waiting until Judgment Day arrived for the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. And Judgment Day was executed at the hand of the Jews. They were God's instruments of wrath on that occasion. And so again, these are just microcosms of what Brother Turner used to suggest would be the end of the world, or the end of humanity as we know it. But again, when you think about the wickedness of the city, you think about verse 21, where God says, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. You might read that and you might say, you mean God doesn't know everything? And God's going to have to go and investigate? I think we're misreading it if that's how we read it.
This is an anthropomorphic form.
Perhaps, but I think it's more God's mercy, again, resonates here, where he's about to have this exchange with Abraham. If we can just find 10 righteous souls there. And so the Lord is going to personally go and have these angelic visitors go to the city and see how they're received, see how they are treated. And if Lot is successful in working with and convincing his family to be on board, then God's, I think, saying here, we'll just go and see what happens. And if it's as bad as I know that it is, then we know what we're going to do. And so chapter 19, it was really bad. It was awful. But again, when you think about the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, I know what we typically say was their sin, and we're right. That was the chief characteristic sin of that particular region. But it wasn't their only sin. And it usually isn't. When a society reaches the point where homosexuality is embraced and encouraged and participated in so widely, it's usually an indication that there is decadence and there's immorality and godlessness on every level and manifested in every possible way. And so we read, for example, later in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16:49, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me, which would certainly be a reference to their typical sin where we associate with them. Therefore I took them away as I saw fit. Of course, Jude does summarize in Jude verse 7, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and going after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire.
What was that reference in Ezekiel passage?
Ezekiel 16:49 to 51.
Thank you.
I know it seems incredible, but unfortunately it is true. In our society today, that there are a number of people, and some of those people who grew up in the Lord's church with me, who do not know, honestly do not know, that the Bible strictly forbids homosexuality. I was astounded recently to learn that someone wouldn't just be born knowing this. In fact, I believe we are born with a sense that that's not right. It's not natural, certainly. That's not right. That's not normal. It's not what it's supposed to be. But when it comes to the question of judgment and judging, we're very, I guess, loath to do that anymore. And so a lot of people have adopted a very antinomian view of the world. And they're really surprised, quite surprised to learn that the Bible categorically condemns this lifestyle. In Romans chapter 1, we're all familiar, of course, with this. I won't read it all. But Paul certainly references this when he said that God gave them up to vile passion, speaking of the Gentile nations. Even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burn in their lust for one another. Men with men committing what is shameful and receiving themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And that penalty was stated later in the last verse of Romans chapter 1, death. That's the penalty associated with it. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. This is explicit. There's no ambiguity here. We're stating very clearly, this is the lifestyle. If it's not repented of, it will cause you to be lost. And so we cannot escape what the Bible clearly teaches here. A number of people are struggling with, why are some people homosexual? Why do some people feel the need to have unnatural, and I know that people say, you shouldn't talk that way. Well, we have a new president now, and I can talk any way I want to, and I can just state the facts. And in fact, this is biblical speech here. It is unnatural. Biologically, it doesn't work. We're not made anatomically to be with the same sex in a sexual way. We're not made that way. And so it is unnatural. And as Paul said, it's shameful. It is sinful, 1 Corinthians 6. All that's true. But again, there are a lot of people who are inclined toward homosexuality. And they say, I want to be with someone of the same sex. And I've had a number of people ask me, why are they this way? I don't have the slightest idea. I know that there are a number of theories. I know there are a lot of theories generally that have to do with home life, how an individual is raised, relationship with a mother, relationship with a father, or vice versa, depending on the sex. Can have adverse effect on the development of a child. There is an excellent work in my library done by 2 or 3 of our PhD brethren who have researched this extensively, who suggest that there is a trigger that kind of goes off in the mind of pre-adolescents that may incline them in one way or the other to be like this. I do know this for a fact. I'm just 51 years old. But unless there were a lot of really suppressed homosexuals when I was in high school, we didn't have anybody that was a homosexual. Well, we had one, and he was beat up every day, and he didn't talk about it, and he certainly didn't let anyone know about it, and girls were certainly not that way. I think it's almost the exact opposite now. If you're straight, you're weird. If you're just normal, then there's something wrong with you or abnormal about you because you're normal. It's just flip-flop. So I have a tendency to think and to suppose that there's a lot of social pressure with a lot of young people to be inclined this way. From my generation, I do not understand that. I cannot, will go to my grave not understanding someone being pressured into that kind of... It just doesn't compute in my brain. But I'm saying all that to say this. People are always asking me, as a preacher, well, what if someone feels that way? Are they going to be condemned because they have that tendency? I can't explain it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not God. I didn't make people. So I couldn't tell you why they're the way they are. But I do know in the list that I just read to you, adulterers are mentioned. Idolaters are mentioned. Drunkards are mentioned. Revilers are mentioned. Extortioners are mentioned. If we're going to say that because someone is inclined toward homosexuality, that therefore they have the right to act out upon that inclination and to live the lifestyle they want to live, then we could easily argue some people are predisposed to be drunkards. And they can't help but drink. And so we shouldn't hold it against someone if they want to drink alcohol all the time. It's their choice. I mean, maybe they shouldn't have had that first drink or whatever, but hey, now they've got that gene. You know, there's a long-standing argument for many years that alcoholics were born that way, genetically predisposed that way. And of course, the argument's made for homosexuals. Any sinful, deviant behavior, there's some geneticist out there that says you were born that way, can't help it. Well, I was born a straight guy. But I'm here to tell you, straight guys have their own issues. Now, if straight guys acted out on all of their issues, we'd be just as simple as a homosexual that acted out on their issues. I mean, I'm simply speaking this way. I know it's kind of crude, and I hate to be this way. But we get so caught up sometimes in the emotional hysteria. Well, what if someone can't help but feel that way? It's not a question of how you feel. It's a question of how you live. It's not a question of being tempted. It's a question of acting out on that temptation. And I think those are distinctions that really have to be made. Fran, your arm's going to break. Yes.
No, it's not. I put it down. I think that a lot of this starts when children start to school, because they are taught from the beginning, you've got to accept everybody and their ways.
Well, it's cool to be different, isn't it? It's cool to be a minority. And if at some point, though, tattoos and homosexuality are not going to be the minority anymore, so why would you want a tattoo or be a homosexual? So you have to go back to being normal. I mean, you got to be normal to be weird. It's strange, isn't it? It's kind of like hairstyles.
I think it has a lot to do with the home life.
It can have a lot to do with that.
There's no man in the house for a boy being raised.
Sometimes it's the opposite.
Right.
I don't know that we can really come up with an answer. I know there's a lot of theories, but again, I'm not here to try to suggest I know the answer, and I can tell you why, but I'm simply observing that this argument or this concept that is very prevalent today, that someone feels that way, and it generally has only to do with homosexuality. If you feel as though you want to be attracted to the same sex, it's okay for you to act upon that feeling and that urge. I'm sorry, we wouldn't say the same thing of a pedophile or someone who wanted to have relations with animals. We wouldn't say that of those individuals. What would we say? No, don't tell me what you would say of those individuals. Okay. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Well, here's a sobering question for America. Is God a respecter of persons? Did he judge Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yes.
Will he judge us if we do not change course?
Yes.
We have work to do, don't we? Chapter 19. Now the two angels, this is the dark place we're about to enter. And I'm saying that seriously because, I don't know, Lot's behavior is very disturbing to me. Extremely disturbing to me. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. You don't have to read any further. And we already read where he pitched his tent towards Sodom, and yet what was the commentary by the Holy Spirit? The inhabitants of that city were sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And so if he's sitting in the gate of the city, what does that tell you?
He was,
Part of the ruling class. He's in politics. He's a ruler in the city. Wow. How did he achieve this status? When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, "Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house, spend the night and wash your feet, and that you may rise early and go on your way." So like his uncle, he's showing hospitality.
that's not the only reason.
And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. He made them a feast, baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." And they said, "Stand back." Then they said, "This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." So Lot said to them, "Please no, my lords. Indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to. It's a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live?" And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. And then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace. It came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his, can you blame him? And he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, "Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. Before we close our class tonight, I want to blow your mind, as mine was blown. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7, or verse 6 rather. Peter says, turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Wow. If Lot was considered righteous, what does that tell you about the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah? What kind of people were they? You understand how sometimes people can become so vile, so evil. There's not any humanity left in them. They're just fit for nothing but to be destroyed. I don't know about you, this is disturbing to me. When I read of Lot, I respect the fact that a man wants to protect strangers that come to visit. These are his own daughters. I mean, what kind of view did people have of women that would allow them to treat their own flesh and blood daughters this way? It's one of those things I just can't relate to. I can't get my mind around it. But here he is, willing to do this. And of course, his daughters bless their hearts. We say that in the South. When somebody's so far gone, they don't really know right from wrong anymore. But they get their own father drunk and have relations with him so they can bear children. It's a horrible and sad time. And it all goes back to a decision to pitch his tent towards Sodom. And he's paying a heavy price. And I see that our time has expired, but bell hadn't rung. That's a first. I want y'all to take note of that. I saw the clock had expired and no one has rung the bell. And that's okay. Jordan will take care of that. I just wanted to let you know your kids are probably running around crazy downstairs. What? Thanks. Number 306, please. Your songbooks. 306. The bell did ring, didn't it? I did. I actually said 306, but it's the same thing.
Anybody else know that song?
You got a new one on? Do I? Okay. Number 306, please, in your songbooks. We want to extend again our sympathy to Sonia Brooks and the passing of her mother-in-law. Her funeral was yesterday, and I want to remember her and all those who are hurting this time of year. Again, ladies' breakfast is this Saturday. It's here at the Trading Post Cafe in Rica at 9 o'clock. So ladies, don't forget your breakfast together. Perk Up the Pantry will be the second Sunday. That's the 8th of January at 9 a.m. So please consult the bulletin about the items that we need. Don't forget the classes, Georgia School of Preaching classes. There are still sign-up sheets in the foyer. Please fill those out and let me have that before you leave as soon as you possibly can, so we can make a record of that. Don't forget the area-wide youth devotional. Again, will be January the 8th. We'll be hosting the youth devotional here ourselves the 13th. Is that correct? Or is there some... That's the lock-in, isn't it? So you're not going to have devotional at all. You're going to lock-in. Lock the doors and no devotion. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Okay, we're locking the kids in January the 13th and leaving them in the building all night. Is that right? Okay. All right. Area-wide singing will be the last Friday night in Bremen in January. Can you believe that January will be Sunday? And it will be 2017. Wow. Please remember my father who's at home not feeling well tonight in your prayers. Also, we have a prayer request from our sister Doris Sanders for her niece, Sherry Parsons, who is suffering from cancer. And they're asking, certainly we remember them in our prayers this evening. Well, this is the last service for 2016 that we're going to be able to attend at the Villa Rica Church of Christ. And as we often will say, and rightly so, being the last service, this is the time for self-reflection and personal inventory. I always like to think when we come to the end of a year, I know we can look back over the year, and there are a lot of things I'm sure we've done that we regretted doing, things we wish we had done that we left undone. And I know that when the new year comes around, we'll have that resolution ready to do new things, better things, to serve the Lord in a better way. But whatever the case may be, as we close out this service tonight, as you look at your life and you do that personal inventory, if you find there's anything lacking in your life, or if there's any need